The left realist view of the police and courts in the social construction of crime and deviance is focused around their concepts of marginalisation, relative deprivation, subcultures and the square of crime. So unlike the neo-Marxists and labelling theorists, they don't see crime purely as a result of labelling, and they do argue that it's down to reality, that there are particular groups that commit more crime. So they see the police and courts as playing a role in solving crime, but they see the traditional approach and the conservative approach as too oppressive, as part of a military policing style. So they would criticise the right realist approach, which says use the police and use prison. The left realists would say that this ignores the fact that prison styles, in terms of military styles, can increase marginalisation of offenders, and actually it increases deviance further. Prison should only be used in the worst cases for the worst types of offences, and again, prison can tend to marginalise and create a kind of university of crime, and it doesn't rehabilitate and reintegrate. It separates, isolates and marginalises. So the left realists would argue that policing needs to be consensual. That means with the consent, with the agreement of the community based on what the community wants. The courts should take into account the needs of the victim, because the voice of the victim has been ignored in the past, because it's always been offender-focused court and criminal justice system. The victim impact statements could be seen as a result of this kind of argument, that victims should be taken into account and their views and needs should be taken into account when deciding or as part of the criminal justice system. The Restorative Justice strategy has been used, and the Restorative Justice Council says that there's a 27% drop in the rate of reoffending or recidivism using restorative justice. This would be supported by left realists who advocate processes like restorative justice because they believe in reintegration rather than marginalisation. So they believe in trying to encourage people to understand the impact on the victims of their crime, so that they can change their behaviour rather than feeling ashamed of themselves, which doesn't lead to integration. The left realists can be criticised. They can be seen as too soft on crime by the right realists, who argue they ignore the need to punish selfish human beings because they are influenced by Marxists. The left realists think that we need to have some degree of sympathy with offenders and understand their situation as well as their choices. The right realists would say they underplay choices and ignore the harm caused by crime as a result. The feminists argue left realists ignore the way in which the police and courts and official statistics don't reflect the reality of crime because of the hidden nature of domestic violence and abuse. They could argue, 7 times more likely to be raped by your husband than a stranger, according to radical feminists. Left realists underplay domestic and private crime, which is ignored by the police and courts, they argue, because the left realists emphasise street crime. You can also argue the left realists over-predict crime, and that their approach to crime could be criticised because since the mid-90s the crime rate has decreased. This may be nothing to do with community policing and courts, and more to do with the price of electronic goods, which has dropped, so it's not worth stealing goods so often, and to economic changes. So overall, you could say that the left realists offer a different view to the police and courts held by the traditional views, but probably not seen as radical enough by the neo-Marxists who want to change the whole Marxist system, and too conservative. But also too left wing from the right realist perspective.